Hi, this is Daniel Chang, CEO and founder of Line Sniper, and today I'm going to show you how to beat the sportsbooks without using any math or mathematical models using these two simple tricks. These are the same techniques that I used to take one of our snipers in training, Ronnie P, as documented all on YouTube from $1,000 to $100,000 bankroll in just the span of March Madness. If you don't believe me, check out these short clips that you're going to see right away.
UCLA, Alabama.
So we have UCLA for a fairly big number, I think, to win 50 or something, which we bet, I believe,
yes,
after the first round.
42,000. So here we are.
We're here, man.
So I've had a lot of betting struggles, and it took me a long time to learn the information that I've learned today. So really it's about teaching people to get the best lines, make sure they're line shopping, and using the tools and analysis that Line Sniper has to provide in order to bet smarter and win more profitable bets. Now, these two important tips are imperative for winning at sports betting over the long run, and were the foundational aspects of how I became a professional sports bettor. So let's jump right into it. The first one is line shopping. At any given time, a betting line is offered at a variety of prices across all sports books. Now, for the amateur bettor, this might not be intuitive at first. The price of a line at a sports book is not the same at FanDuel versus DraftKings versus BetMGM or any of the other sports books that you might have access to, including some of the offshore sports books. This is extremely important because there's going to be a discrepancy of prices at which you can bet sports betting lines at. And ultimately, getting the best price over the long run is going to be imperative to winning. So if you could listen to one piece of advice that anyone in your sports betting career could tell you, it's you're flushing down money down the toilet if you don't line shop and have access to a variety of sports books that give you a variety of prices in which to bet different games, props, and futures on. Just to give you a little bit more information, if you made 10 bets a week at $100 per bet, and I guarantee you the majority of people watching this video are making even more bets than that, and you win 50% of the time at an average price of minus 105, you're going to save $2,000 versus average price of minus 115 over the course of a year. Now that's a very conservative estimate on the estimated expected value that you're going to gain or lose by line shopping. In reality, I think for the majority of bettors, it's simply much, much more. So make sure you have a variety of sportsbooks that you have access to and a variety of prices. The best analogy to think of this is if you're going to buy a car and you're going to look at the different prices offered on that car, you would go to a variety of different dealerships and check online to figure out what dealership is offering the biggest discount on that car you're buying. The same is true for sports betting. If you're able to buy your asset, which in this case is a sports bet, at the biggest discounted price, that's going to be a good deal, similar to when you're buying a car. Now, this might seem all hypothetical and very difficult to implement, but I'm going to show you two quick examples of when I made sports bets that made me a ton of money and real-life, real-time examples of how you can do this. So I'm just going to pull up very quickly 3 sports books, and I suggest you have access to a variety of sports books, even greater than 3. But these are just the 3 most widely used sports books within New Jersey. You could even use PointsBet or a variety of other situations. Now let's just look at any NBA game line for the day. Take the first game, for example, Washington Wizards versus Atlanta Hawks, plus 6.5, minus 110, over 239, and a money line of 205. Now, your expectation, without knowing anything else, would be that BetMGM and FanDuel are offering the exact same prices. But let's take a look and make sure that's actually correct. So let's just look at basketball very quickly in the Washington Wizards versus Atlanta Hawks. As you can see right off the bat, Washington is offering this bet at a price of plus 7, where the DraftKings Sportsbook is offering it at a price of 6.5. Now, how many times have you lost a bet by half a point and said, oh my gosh, this was the worst bad beat in the world? Now, if you just simply line shop and get the best of that line and get an extra half a point, every time that lands on 7, you're going to get a push instead of a loss, and that's going to make the difference over the long run. Now, let's just look at the point total, for example, 239 versus 239.5. So if you're betting the under, Bet it at BetMGM versus DraftKings. You're going to simply profit over the long run by doing that one simple trick and make sure that you win a ton more. Now, even look at the money line. 230 versus 205. Now, imagine you can bet $100 and you're going to get $230 back versus only 205. Now, that seems like a good deal to me. So make sure you line shop. It's really apparent in games and totals, the difference between getting good prices and bad prices and just simply having access to 2 or 3 sports books, and in the best case scenario, over 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is going to really help you profit over the long run, and is going to make a massive difference in terms of your ability to win in sports betting. Now, let's look at another market where you'll see an even more dramatic difference in terms of what line shopping could potentially do, and that's the futures market. If I simply look at the futures for NBA championship winners, for example, and just compare the different odds that are offered at the 2 sports books, you'll see that there's pretty stark differences between some of the bets. Take, for example, Atlanta Hawks at plus 5,000 or 50 to 1 at BetMGM, and it's going to be 100 to 1 at DraftKings. Now, imagine for some reason you think that the Atlanta Hawks are going to win the championship. You've done your research, you looked at the stats, and you love the Atlanta Hawks. Now, if you simply did a line shop and use BetMGM as your best book, you're going to bet it at 50 to 1. You're going to bet, let's say, $1,000 and you're going to make $50,000. Not a bad payday, don't get me wrong. But if you took that exact same bet and placed it at DraftKings, you'd make $100,000, almost double your money, and a life-changing amount for a majority of people. So that's to say, the most important piece of sports betting is making more money when you win and losing less money when you lose. Knowing that you're going to win some of the time and lose some of the time, there's no one in the world that can win at 90% or 100% or even 75% over the long run. Our suggestion is make sure you get the best lines, because if you're going to win, you want to win $100,000 versus $50,000. I think that's a very important point looking at the futures market. I think it's pretty clearly illustrated. You can see in some of our actual bets that we place that this was a huge premise of why we placed some of those bets. Take a look at our last video where we went to Atlantic City and bet some of the division futures for MLB. Yeah, and I got in some futures bets that we were talking about all trip. The first one was for the Milwaukee Brewers to win their division, as you can see, for $80,000 to win $192,000. If we look at that bet currently at a bunch of the different sports books, you'll see that the Milwaukee Brewers now are plus 120 versus plus 240 to win the division. That seems like the bet has dramatically moved in our direction. But the truth of the matter is that 240 was mispriced at the time, and simply that the 240 wasn't widely available, and that sportsbooks was hanging what we call a stale number for professional sports bettors. So going back to the presentation, line shopping is simply the best way you're going to make a ton of money right off the bat and really limit your losses when you lose. So that's my first piece of advice that's really going to help you win over the long run. The second piece of advice is how to know if you're a winning sports bettor versus a losing sports bettor. And this is something that's largely misunderstood by the majority of sports bettors that I've met in my life. Most sports bettors simply go, if I've won more money than I've lost over the last 10 bets, I'm a winning sports bettor. If I've lost more money over the last 10 bets, I'm a losing sports bettor. That's not the best way to think about sports betting and whether you're a profitable sports bettor over the long run. This is for a variety of reasons. The first reason is that's a pretty small sample size. So over 10 bets, you can get lucky on a few of those bets or unlucky on a few of those bets, and that's going to massively skew your results into whether you believe you're a winning or losing sports bettor. So as a result, how do you actually figure out if you're a winning or losing sports bettor, or more importantly, if you're placing good or bad bets? The first thing to look at is closing lines. Now, what is a closing line? I think that's a really important question that a lot of people misunderstand and get wrong. Now, most touts and sports bettors out there that you'll see on other networks really don't even know what the closing line is. They simply think this. If at DraftKings, for example, they go to this NBA game and they look at this Washington Wizards versus Atlanta Hawks game, that the money line closes at 205 and minus 250, that's the closing line. That's simply not the case and not the number you're trying to beat as a profitable sports bettor over the long run. In fact, it's really the midpoint or no vig line on this number that you have to beat over the long run. Now, what's the most accurate closing line to check up on, and what are you actually trying to beat? Well, the closing line is an important objective to measure performance versus relying on your gut. The closing line is going to be the point in time in which all efficient information is captured by the market. All the sharp bettors have bet one side of the game or another side of the game, and the consensus of information has determined that this is the correct probability that one team is going to win over the other team. So, where can you find the closing lines that it's going to be most efficient? There's a few sports books that professional sports bettors really regard as efficient markers of information. The first sports book is one that many of you will be familiar with, which is this offshore book named Pinnacle. Now, why is Pinnacle going to be a sports book that has efficient information? The first reason is that it offers low vig lines, which means that they offer minus 105 a side versus minus 110 a side. So they're charging you much less to bet. And as a result, for price-sensitive professional sports bettors, that's where they're going to place the majority of their bets. In addition, they have higher limits than many of the other sports books. And as a result, sports bettors are able to bet more into these sports books, and as a result, they get more information. Particularly sharp sports bettors. They have a history of not limiting or kicking out sharp sports bettors versus some of the other books that you'll see, like William Hill, like DraftKings, and many of the regulated sports books. Alright, so now that you understand why closing line value is important and where to find the closing line value and closing line, the next thing to figure out is how do you actually calculate the closing line? As we mentioned, it's the no vig line between these two numbers. So for example, minus 105, minus 105. Now, if you bet this game at plus 6 and you're betting it at minus 105, you're not beating the closing line. The closing line is plus 6.5, even money. So if you bet plus 6.5, let's say minus 102, you're still not beating the closing line, even though you're beating the posted number. You have to beat the no vig line once again. Now that's not an easy concept for most people to grasp right off the bat. So let me take a couple more examples so you can see pretty accurately how I calculate the closing line. For the over-under on this Washington Wizards-Atlanta Hawks game, for example, the over-under is 239. Now what's the midpoint or the no vig line on this? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. The no vig line is actually 239 minus 101 for the over. So if you're betting the over, you have to be betting it at a better price than minus 101. So if you're betting 239 at even money or plus money, you're making money. If you're betting the under 239, you have to be betting it at a price of better than plus 101. So if you're betting it at plus 102, plus 103, plus 104 at the closing line, etc., that's going to be a profitable bet over the long run. Now, targeting the no vig line is a major metric that sports bettors rely on, and following these sports books that are what we regard as sharp sports books and comparing it to your other regulated sports books is a surefire way to know if you're making profitable bets over the long run. Let me just give you one example of how I would calculate that and just show you some examples of some situations where you can see that there's a pretty wide difference between what a very sharp sports book is offering and what a non-sharp sports book is offering. Now, let me very quickly show you one thing in DraftKings where you can see there's clearly a mistake that is being made by the sports book. Let's just look at MLS, for example, and look at the team futures. This is a percent chance that a team wins the playoffs, wins the Eastern Conference, wins the MLS Cup, or ultimately wins the Western Conference. Now, let's look at one team which I saw earlier, the San Jose Earthquakes at 40-1 to win the championship. Now, let's take a look at the chance for the San Jose team to win their conference. You can see that it's 33-1. Now, how does that make sense? If they're one of the worst teams in the league, they're likely to be an underdog in the finals. So if their chance to win it all is 40-1, their chance to win the Western Conference should be something like 18 or 17-1, for example, assuming you think that 40-1 is correct. So you can see that there's clearly a discrepancy between this 30-1 and the 40-1. Now let's compare some of that to a sharp sportsbook and see kind of if there's a pretty big difference between what the sharper sportsbooks are offering and ultimately what these regulated sportsbooks are offering to figure out if you're making a good or bad bet. Another sportsbook that's widely regarded as fairly sharp is a sportsbook called Bookmaker, because it's a very similar concept to what you're seeing at Pinnacle. Now let's look at what they're offering for the MLS futures. You can see that they're offering, once again, San Jose at 38.5 to 1 to win it all. Now, you're getting San Jose to win it all, to win the Western Conference at 33 to 1. Now look at that spread. If you double that, that implies that you're really getting San Jose to win it all at something closer to 70 to 1 or even potentially 80 to 1. So look at that spread between San Jose at Bookmaker and DraftKings, and you can see that you're really making a profitable bet over the long run. So those are just a couple examples of what it means to beat the closing line, what it means to beat the closing lines on the futures market, as well as game sides and totals. So with those two surefire bets, I really think that you should be on the right track to winning in sports betting over the long run. You don't need to know anything about the teams, anything about the players, or even the sports you're betting. If you simply know that you're beating the closing lines by comparing sharp sportsbooks versus regulated sportsbooks, and you're line shopping for the best available prices, you're going to win over the long run. And I guarantee you, because I've done it myself, that you can make $10,000 a month using just those 2 points if you're diligent at it and you're really committed to doing those two things to the best of your ability. Thanks a lot for listening. I know it's not super exciting material, but it's the most important material to winning over the long run. If you liked what I said, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out and gives us better rankings so that more people can listen to our sports betting information. Thanks a lot and have a great sports betting week.